David, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on, mate.
Andy, really looking forward to this. A lot of people that I know speak highly of you, and I'm sure we have a lot of common friends. So looking forward to having a conversation with you today. Thanks for the time.
Of course. Just to begin with, as is tradition, can I get you to walk through your background and maybe bring us from where you've been career-wise through to the current day, so we've got the full context of you.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose I followed curiosity, and kind of I'd start with that because when I was 16, 17, I was interested in medicine, I was interested in psychology, I was interested in journalism, I was interested in physio, and ultimately I I listened to my intuition and started with physio and kind of leaned into sports medicine in particular, and spent 15, 16 years really in that space through different sports, private practices, some consulting opportunities, and I suppose really, Andy, the big hinge was when I left Ireland and went to London via Italy and worked with Ice Kinetic Medical Group, one of the first non-Italians to join them, and I think that opened my eyes to football medicine, to sports medicine, to the international picture as to what we're trying to do and opportunities out there. Roll forward now, that's kind of 2012, 2013, and my interests now are probably less so focused on athlete facing and actually treating, physio undergrad, but a lot more around how can we all get better together and kind of what does that mean. It could mean anything from education, building awareness, to personal development and soft skill development for practitioners as part of a team. But I've also done some side hustles that have kind of helped inform where I am now. I built a business in Ireland that focused predominantly on well-being and performance in the business section. So worked a lot with multinationals and corporates for 4 years, still do a bit of advisory on that. Had a podcast like yourself, and now really have some advisory consulting work with teams, and that looks like recruitment, and it also looks like learning development and kind of education. So, you know, kind of lots of different things. And I suppose I'll pause after this, when I left London and came back to Dublin, knowing it was always going to look really different because of the scale and the amount of people in Ireland, it was always going to be different to replicate that as a physio. I knew I had to try different things. So I kind of leaned into the entrepreneurial world, and I think now where I am now is probably where I'm going to stay for the next 8, 9, 10 years. I think it's not one or two things I'm doing now, but it's not far off it. Was before it was probably a little bit more than that.
Sort of now you're in learning development and organizational design. Had you, I guess, along the way of being I'm just going to call it a practitioner or a physio, had you been in educational roles or leadership roles that then kind of inspired that interest next?
Yeah, I was always drawn to people that had an ability to teach and educate others, right? So even when I think of people at my time in London or Italy, part of culture groups or rehab groups, the people I looked to and had mentorship opportunities with were the people that were really good at distilling what they do and kind of sharing their knowledge and wisdom and their mistakes made and how they learned from those. And I really soaked that up. I've seen it in the business world too, some environments where people are willing to explore learnings and others less so. So I've continued to really lean into that. And I suppose the funny thing is, in the sports world, of course it's performance driven and it's player centric, and I understand that, right? The player is what it's about. You want to win and you want your best players playing. But I keep on asking the question about the people, the environment, the culture, the systems around the players, so that everything is firing that little bit more to give the players a better chance. And so that's really what it's about now, that what is that energy and feel and bricks and mortar around the athlete. And that's the question I keep coming back to. Kind of, what does it look like to make that a little bit better? What is good and what is great, or how do you even understand what that looks like? So, Andy, what I'm really interested in now is when I have the opportunity to go to teams, and if they're asking for a bit of help or support, like you said, from an organizational perspective or a culture piece, I suppose it's for me trying to understand where do they want to go, where are they now, what are the steps in between, and kind of what does that look like?
It might be a bit of a broad question, but how do you, like different contexts, you don't have to mention clients individually, but how do you find best practice examples nowadays? So if you don't have to give the example, but if a team or an organization said, we want to move in a certain direction, how do you decide what you're going to model that on?
It's a good question. I suppose move in a certain direction. What's that direction they want to move in? So I suppose I'd nearly start with that, and kind of asking them very simple questions, leaning into Chris Voss and kind of really trying to help understand with empathy where they're trying to go and what is that. Oftentimes it's about looking for balance, maybe in an environment. As an example, if you're looking at a team and they're saying, we don't think we quite have what we want, or we're not quite where we need to be, or we're not winning as much, or too many injuries, I suppose sometimes I just take a step away and go, where are you in terms of stability? What do you like in terms of cohesion? Have you had a lot of change from leadership? Have you had a lot of attrition and turnover? What's it like between a balance between your medical department and maybe your performance department and your people and culture and HR, or is there a huge discrepancy in personnel there? And I suppose when you start to just look that little layer deeper, you start to go, you've got way too many on the medicine side and not enough on the performance side. Why is that? And then that might lend itself to further questions, and that might be the piece of work you work on.
Yeah, this might be a good time to talk on the sort of consultancy work you do while we're on this sort of thread anyway. Can you talk us through Next Level Group, kind of what it is and why it exists as well?
I suppose it exists because there's so many people out there trying to figure out where they want to go and get clarity as to what the next step looks like. I've been there, I can relate to that. A lot of my friends are in that space and have been in that space. So it was founded on the premise of, yes, teams want to get better. As to what that looks like can change from team or organization. But there's a lot of good people out in the world, and when they're trying to find their next job, it's about helping them understand what that looks like and also helping them navigate and position themselves for greater success. So for me, that was a huge ethos behind why it came about. And also, I suppose I've studied people that have managed to influence and add value to sporting organizations, and what they've managed to achieve has been incredible. But oftentimes it's come from supporting a team, from a hiring search process piece, or again just a little bit of consulting. So I see and saw Next Level when it was founded only a couple of years ago really as a vehicle for me to spend more time with teams and understand what they're doing and help get them better. And really fortunate that in our team we've got a lot of experience. We've got a lot of people that have done a lot of amazing projects all around the world. So just for me, again, having the opportunity to listen, ask them questions, learn from that, see what's been done in the past. But also, I think we're different to other people in this space. What I've learned in the last year is a lot of people want to be better. And that's hard, right? Because it's a competitive world, and if better is better money, is better scale, is it the teams, is it the badges, what is it? Is it the outcome? But how can you play different? And I think where we play different, or where we like to say our niche and category is we feel we know the motivations of the people and the teams. We feel we have the expertise in the space because our team has people that have worked across sports medicine or performance or physio. So, and our friends are that space. So I feel that equips us with an ability to know why someone would want to move and where would they move and what sort of skill sets are required to be successful if you're going from Australia to the States or the States to Europe. So, long-winded answer, but I hope it gives you a bit more clarity anyway.
Yeah, for sure. What are the sort of big, I guess the big services or the sort of big reasons why people would employ you? What are the sort of like services that you offer teams or practitioners?
It's really, I feel if a team, a team in the UK or a team in one of the big leagues in the States just has a recognition that they want change in their backroom, that the team behind the team, there's been an ownership change or a new manager, or there's a sense that there's a lack of leadership or a head of department role, and more often than not, from some of the work we've done, word of mouth spreads subtly, and we get contacted to, those conversations we had today. Those starter conversations usually are around, well, what currently do you have from a people perspective in terms of quantity and personnel, in terms of roles and responsibilities, and then usually we go, well, here's some comparisons within your current league from what we know, and even outside the league where there is some transferability, and how can we learn from that? And then that usually, brings a question as to probably a process to find someone to bring to the team.
I think you probably touched upon it earlier, but in sort of the broad array of questions that you might ask teams or practitioners for sort of trying to support them, but do you have sort of like organized frameworks for how you try and implement maybe certain strategies, or change management as an example? You bring new people in, or you bring in a new team. Is there sort of, not formulas, because I think that's the wrong word to use, but is there good frameworks that you follow that help you implement things like change?
Yeah, I've studied Cotter and change agency, and change management is a huge part of the corporate world, especially when managing directors change or executive leadership groups changes. So there's a lot of principles and mental models I've leaned into when we're talking about that. I think a huge thing that's people sometimes miss, Andy, is, for argument's sake, you hire a new head of department to lead up a team, right? So directly reporting to a sporting director. So he's brought in, and maybe he was in a different environment, maybe a different country, but what's it like 3 to 4 months or 6 months later? And I think sometimes people can miss that. So a huge emphasis for what we try to do is follow up and ask the team, and ask whoever signed the contract for us, but also the people, and also that individual. How are you doing? Like, is your wife happy? Is your husband happy? How are the children? Because you want it to work, you want it to be sustainable, you want it to be and I think when you talk change and you bring in people, 1, 2, or 3, that's quite a lot of change potentially in, a department that mightn't be that big. So just continuously monitoring it, asking for feedback, seeking it, having another on-site visit to just again get the sense as to, is everything going okay? Because sometimes people think, and it's happened to us, we've worked with a client, the clients are the teams, and we have found the person that is deemed the right person after long list, short list, but then they're kind of happy enough and they don't really want us to visit them again. But we would challenge and say, but a huge part of what we want here is, you've just initiated a huge change, we want to make sure it works and it sticks, because we've seen the other side when, there was a team in England, high profile team, 2 hires that we were involved in, and it didn't quite work out with one of them. And it was a personality clash. It was a bit of a disparity as to what that person thought he was falling into. And so 6 months later there was another change. And then again we're kind of going, what happened here? Like, and you're talking a model, it's an after action review. It's kind of, well, what would change here? Where was the iteration? Could we have spotted that earlier? Was there a mistake made in the process earlier? So yeah, lots of specific frameworks. Like, we've got certain appraisal tools, we have certain benchmarking strategies that we sometimes use, but I suppose we always like to make them that little bit bespoke, depending on wants and needs of a team we're working with. And that's also why at any one time we won't work with a lot of teams. Like, we're not a very big group by design, because when we work with a team, a couple of teams, we want to do a good job and we want it to be personable. And if they're communicating with David or Rich or Richard or whoever, or Alexia, we want them to feel that touch point is there and the ball is not passed off.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're sort of trying to be very different to like a big 4 consulting firm. Obviously different use case, but yeah.
Well, yeah, it's that different because I've been on the other side. I kind of know what it looks like, and again, it's just not trying to be better, but how are we different? And I think if we're interacting with a GM, an assistant GM, a sporting director, or a performance director, it's very important that person feels they phone or text us and the same, and it's reciprocal, and the streams and channels of communication doesn't change, because obviously, as we know from our professions, Andy, it's all about trust, it's all about relationships, it's all about connection. And I think if you start to mess that up by passing the ball a little bit, then it can affect that. And a huge part of what we have learned is previous clients are ongoing clients, because if you've done a good job, whilst they'll tell their friends, they'll continue to come back to you, so it's repeated business. So the biggest thing we need to do is keep nurturing that relationship and front-loading value, and only selling, and I put that in parentheses, when the time is appropriate, identified by the team.
I can imagine as well it probably works almost better when it is a longer term relationship, because you probably, from an institution perspective, want to periodize the change, don't you? You don't want to bring in too much too soon. You sort of want to, like you would with a training program, you want to gradually implement things, test, iterate as you go.
Yeah, kind of like that famous thing we've all heard: too much, too fast, too soon, and you break down when you take up running in January. And it'd be the same thing if a team rings us and says we need to bring in a physician or a head of sports science, and we've got 6 weeks, 4 weeks actually, and it's start of February. I suppose the first question will go is, why so sudden? Really? Like, is there a real necessity and need for it to? Because if you want to do a good job, this is what we would recommend. And I mean, to your point, Andy, I echo it and I agree with you. You don't want to rush things. You don't want to do a half the job. You want to do a good job. And that involves spending time with them, going over there, understanding what they're doing, what are their values, where are they trying to go, who do they actually have in the building, looking at all those sort of dynamics, because it's people are complex. So I think, yes, sometimes there's been a sense of urgency and pressure that someone's been need to be found quickly, but it's not really kind of where we want to play. We'd like to do it right, and that could take a couple of months, and it's also about timing of the season that could be more appropriate.
I'm really curious as to how the sort of learning and development works. Just as a sort of tangent with podcasting, you're always interested in education for practitioners, because in some way that's kind of what you're trying to provide in a less formal way, in the case of, say, our podcast. But when it relates to teams and you're trying to figure out learning and development opportunities for them, are they typically coming to you with a spec of what they want to know more about or develop their staff on, or is it more of a sort of you go in and help with a needs analysis for where they can grow, or both? I don't know.
Probably say the latter. It could be both.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it starts with asking the questions as to where they want to get better and what does that look like. And more oftentimes, as we would imagine, it can be pretty well distinguished. If you're working with staff and because I've experienced loads of this, so I can speak to it, be it coaching or mentoring or just asking good questions and being curious, oftentimes it's, well, we need to improve our clinical expertise in these 3 areas because we're suffering a lot in these 3 areas in relation to injury of players. And then it's very clear that the need is to bring in, world-class inputs, resources, systems, protocols in and around management of tendon. What are we doing for hamstrings? What are we doing with concussion? But the flip side, and where I think is really interesting, and where I really leaned into the last couple of years, is the stuff that you sometimes forget, and about equipping practitioners, no matter where you are, starting off, an apprentice, senior, reps in the game for 20 years, but how can you be better at what you do? And oftentimes a huge part of that is communication, influence, decision-making processes, execution of tasks, how do you relate to other people, what's your EQ, how do you handle adversity? So as Seth Godin would call them, the real skills, right? The soft skills that are actually really hard to be really good at. And so sometimes teams, they always are asking for the first, the clinical, technical, because it's probably a little easier to see what that looks like. I challenge a lot of the teams, what about the rest? Because if you get better at coaching or communication with your players in the weights room, it'll probably help transferring onto the field. So, yeah.
probably a perfect time to pivot, or not so much pivot because we're talking about skills, but transitions talking about skills. It was on my radar that you had an event recently, and a book on skills. Are you able to sort of talk about where that came from and maybe sort of where the idea was conceived for you on that?
Yeah. Firstly, Andy, pity you couldn't come. Now we're friends. You'll come to the next one.
For sure.
For sure. You'll be getting an invite in the post. As will Ben Ashworth, who we only found out pre-call. You guys know each other very well. So shout out to Ben, because Ben, you and I go way back. So Andy, where did it start? It started in COVID. It started in COVID when none of us could do anything. And I was interested in what I alluded to previously there, Andy, about we're taught all this stuff in university, college, and as we get out into the world about clinical, technical. I'm speaking from sports medicine, physio background, right? 15 years of just thinking that's what it was. But the people I looked up to and admired in any walk of life, in any domain outside of medical as well, were people that were good at the other stuff, the soft skills stuff. They were good leaders. They had a presence about them. They knew how to speak. They knew how to listen. They knew when to pause. They knew how to handle challenge. They knew what success looked like. They could distill their learnings to others. And so we created my idea, but there was a group of us that created a non-for-profit during COVID called the Learning Physiotherapist. And we ran it for a full year, cohort-based, online community. North of 60 mentors gave inputs from all around the world, from all the biggest sports teams you could think of, lots of big names. And we had over 100 people attend it, pay for the membership. And then we would run monthly mentoring sessions. And there were so many feel-good stories that came off it about it maybe unlocking people's confidence, or people feeling they could make the hard change, or people applying for new jobs, or people just getting more confident on the mic and in front of the camera. And I kept on thinking about that, and we got lots of good feedback from the mentors, but also the students. So that was rolling into year 2, and I just went, I think this should become a book. And it was my idea, and I approached Elsevier at the time because I'd heard about them. But of course, I asked some friends that are way more skin in the game, have written way more and edited way more than me. And I said, would you come along for the ride and help me edit this book? We're going to make it different though. We're going to bring people that don't know each other together and get them to write and collaborate on chapters together about stuff they usually don't talk about, and also about lessons learned. So that culminated after, the guts of 2.5 years in a book with north of 50 people in it. People from, contributions from the West Indies to New Zealand, to Denmark, to the States, to Ireland. Real purposeful cross-section across academia, public healthcare, private healthcare, sports medicine, sports teams. And then I went, well, what next? I said it was great because a huge purpose behind the book for me, Andy, was, yes, to share learnings from people that have done some amazing things, and people like Wayne Diesel, we can all learn from him. Ian, Horsley, we can learn from him. Richie Barber, we can learn from you. Steve Miller, we can learn from you. So absorbing all that, but a huge driver behind it was I was going through a lot of personal challenge at the time at home, right? Because I have 2 kids, but a younger daughter that has Down syndrome and lots of ongoing medical challenges. So I had a huge fuel behind me to make the book the best, most special, most unique project it could be, because all the donations were going to charity in Ireland, children's health and Down syndrome. So I wanted it to be really, really special. And that obviously helped with getting people to come along for the ride. And so I got all these contributions, the book came to life, and then I said, we need to bring the community together. Let's capitalize on that. We had a course, we had a book, has to be an event. So we had a big event in October, supposed to be 50 people, it was 100 people. It was all private invitations. I don't know how everyone else found out, but they did. And it was amazing. And it was, for me, it was a big success because I got to again fundraise a little bit for charities close to my heart. I got to bring a lot of friends together in a room. I think the energy was really, really special. There was there was an energy you could feel if you were part of it. I'm sure if anyone you would ask that was there would say that. Everyone was just trying to collaborate and contribute. There was that sense. And so I want to do that again. So I have another one that I'm, as of last week, kind of got in the books for Dublin. So for Dublin this year, there'll be V2 of essential skills in person. There'll be more people there, and trying to just build on the momentum we've created.
That sounds incredible. What was interesting is I wasn't there, but I think you could tell from people storying it or posting on it that you could just tell that there was a good atmosphere. I think when you get those types of people in a room, people they haven't met before, people they do know, the 6 degrees of separation, you could tell from social media that they had a good atmosphere to the event, just from the sort of, I think the organic publicity that the people that were attending were sharing.
Yeah, like a guy called David Hyatt at the Do Lectures, who's based in Cardigan in Wales, runs events called Small Magical Events, because the Do Lectures is spectacular. For those of you who haven't attended it or want to have an amazing experience, check out the Do Lectures, check out David Hyatt. But I remember him saying to me, it's about the magic. So if you're running an event, it's so easy to find a nice setting and to have great content and great food, but what's the magic, and kind of what's that look like, and how can you get people to want to go but leave with something that's greater than what it is? And I kept on thinking about that. 6 months leading into it, lots of planning and design, and so that was all about who are the speakers I want to hear, and that I think can add so much and have done a lot of amazing things. James Carr, Mark Whittle, 3 amazing women that were doing amazing things around the world, and the list goes on and on. Jeff Conan, but also the people in the room, Andy, like the people in the room, all the people that attended that were there for a reason, because they're all doing amazing things. And then the setting, it had to be a nice setting, right? So we did it in the Tate Modern, in a different place that people aren't used to. So I think when you bring all that together, and then you give a little bit of space in between for people to chat, you have a tour before and you have nice drinks, hopefully people felt they had a little bit of magic, and that's all I wanted. I want people to feel, having left it, that they know that they were contributing to a big cause. There was a big purpose behind it. Everyone got a book that attended it, so everyone donated to charities, but also that hopefully they actually learned some things, because there were some amazing speakers that day.
I'm really curious, within the sort of process of putting together the book and the content itself, with all those great people, was there anything, or any sort of like discoveries or revelations that shocked you that you were able to put in the book? Was there any sort of qualities or ideas that you weren't expecting?
This is
just to put you on the spot.
A good question. I suppose maybe you'd expect this answer or not. What jumped out to me was there was the last section in the book, pretty much the last section of the book, was kind of lessons and stories from people that have done a lot of great work. And there's some big names that contributed there. Big names that have published a lot, done a lot of research, a lot of experience behind them. It was the humility they brought and kind of what they were willing to acknowledge and share that actually, it blew my mind. And I didn't even know a few of them that well, but when you're reading it and you're kind of going, wow, okay. So I think for a reader to read that, me, editor, our editing group, but any reader to pick it up, no matter what age you are, no matter what profession you are, but to know that you're reading a person's story who's achieved an awful lot and has a lot of badges after their name, but for them to say they don't have all the answers, and there were trials and tribulations and it didn't all go rosy along the way, that's such a huge share for people, because I can speak to this every week that a lot of us go through, and we've heard it before, right? Imposter syndrome. Don't quite think we're good enough. Don't quite think we're ready for it. Not sure if I should lean into that challenge. Geez, I made a mistake. Should I go again? But when it just comes to life, because it's on paper and it's written by someone that you've read about or seen and heard of, it just gives you a confidence. And that did surprise me a little bit, because especially a couple of them, I didn't think it would be even written with so much of that, but it was. And I suppose just the other thing too, a lot when the people who I targeted initially and asked, would you write a chapter on this? And I got a little bit of pushback from a couple of them. I can remember, like 5 or 6 of them going, I wouldn't even know what to write about. I've never even spoken about that, Dave. What are you talking about? But nearly those chapters were nearly for me the ones I most enjoyed reading, because actually they were really good, and you could see the effort, the intention, the focus, the energy that had gone into those, and the references made, and just the flow of those chapters. So again, people not quite thinking they could pull it together, but those ones really stood out to me.
Was there, and if I don't want to steal too much of the secret sauce because people should go and buy the book, but was there any sort of common traits or very shared qualities across the different diversities of people that you had in there, or the different backgrounds that they had?
Yeah, and it's something that I broached when I was finishing my short 5-minute talk in London in October, and I'd said it actually at Summer League last year in June or whatever it was, the same thing, but it really reverberated through the book, that in our world, let's call it sport, right? The book wasn't all sport or people working in a high performance sport, but 75% of it was, and it's a competitive dog-eat-dog world, and everyone wants to find the edge and everyone wants to win, right? There's ambition, player, staff, ownership, medicine, performance, you name it. But I'm always saying, yeah, but we can all get better though. Like, we can share, and there's a lot of people in the book that are pretty competitive and, probably been rowing their own boat for a while and doing really good things, great things, and being very successful in their own endeavors. But they did manage to share, and they did manage to collaborate. And, I mentioned it at the time in London. I think it's worth mentioning again that it's really interesting when you put 2 or 3 people together on a project who don't know each other and are geographically hours and miles apart, and they could be at completely different stages of their career as to how you define it. But can they find a way to work together? And there's something special in that if they can make it work, and that came through. So yeah, and there wasn't too much ChatGPT either, because we were checking for that as well.
Maybe V2 of the book you could save time, but no, I don't think you should do that.
Actually, there was a guy called Carl Gombrich from the London Interdisciplinary Schools spoke about interdisciplinarity, and actually in the chapter, it was very interesting. One of the last chapters, he said in his chapter, was so well written, what would ChatGPT say about this? And he gave his expert opinion from his academic rigor background, and he compared in the chapter. And I just thought that was so befitting as to where we are in, late 2024, early 2025, that the kind of vision behind that to actually compare and just, this is the world we live in. So I thought that was kind of funny. So
yeah, I mean, I think week by week, I'm amazed at the someone will share a new AI or large language model with me that can do something or speed something up, and I think it's a weekly occurrence now that I'm finding efficiencies or amazed by what we can increasingly do. So it's an interesting space.
It's an amazing space. I'll just say to that, I know you're going into something else, that I was asked to help with something this week, and a huge part of it was emphasis on tech, AI, wearables, where are we going, what does innovation look like? And this was a mastermind conversation. There was 5 of us talking, but then don't forget the human. Don't forget that whilst there's this rapid acceleration and growth that you have to be a part of it, or otherwise you might be left behind. But what are those other pieces that we have, and what does that look like? So just interesting. Don't know what that answer is, but it was a very provocative conversation, as we just continue to wrap our heads around, to your point, all these new pieces and tools that are coming to us every day, which blows your mind.
I think the thing I find interesting is, it's great that new hardware, new software, etc. capacities come out. I still think it's just really helpful to understand almost the history of it a little bit as well, of like, okay, what were people doing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? What were the trending tools and why then? Because I think sometimes it allows you to see the stuff that comes out and and put it in its place in a good way, in terms of like, okay, this is understanding what a new tech can do, but from the history of going through older tools and systems, what can't it do and what do you need to pair with it? Or I think it just gives you a better context for things if you can look at what we've done in the past as well as what's coming out.
And I think to that, you know, what is the next trend before we know what the trend is? I think that's a question I'm often thinking about. If you know, I find that really interesting, especially in our, you know, in the world of, say, innovation and performance science, sports teams. It's kind of, there's been so much progression across understanding and bringing insights from data and how that helps inform practice and training, etc., etc. But what's the next thing that some people are spotting before we all catch on? I'm excited to see what those are.
Like I think the pendulum swings hard, doesn't it? Because I mean, I remember when I started my career, it was movement screens, and everything was very sort of movement focused, and then it's gone capacity and force focused, and now it's going, well, neither has all the answers. You kind of need both, and you get that. Hopefully, I think the pendulum swings less, and you get that maturity on the subject eventually. But
so what's coming in? What's the trend coming our way, Andy, in 2025?
I wish I knew. I think maybe balance of the pendulum. I think maybe the appreciation of all systems. I think hopefully, but you know, I wouldn't like to put myself as a trendsetter by any means.
A lot of wisdom to that comment, though.
I wanted to ask, where can people actually find the book and keep up to date with the events and the stuff you've got going on?
Yeah, I appreciate it. The book, you know, through Elsevier would be the best place to find it, but you can find it, you know, Barnes and Noble, you know, Coles Books in the UK, anywhere really. It's on Amazon as well, UK, US. It actually is sold quite well. So sometimes there's issues with actually stock, which is great for us.
Good problem.
But definitely Amazon and Elsevier would be the best place to buy it. Regarding the event, I'll be probably percolating a little bit in LinkedIn over the coming months. I have a personal website, davidclancy.com. There's a little bit on an essential skills tab there, where, you know, there'll be a little bit more of a formal announcement made in time. And it's been recommended to me we need to have a standalone site, because it could be a standalone event. And I have some friends in Scandinavia and Australia that want to maybe bring it over that neck of the woods in the next few years. So that would be the thing. And I think, just, Andy, thank you, but point people to my LinkedIn, because if there's anything pertaining to the book or the event or kind of those sort of spaces, more often than not, I put some form of communication there.
Cool. Well, we'll dump a load of your links in the episode show notes and description, so for quick reference, the listeners can hear you and then can find you from all those places you're citing. So, but David, it's been great to chat to you today, and good to sort of hear the pragmatic wisdom you've got out of the projects that you have going on, and also the book and the events. So really cool to chat to you.
Yeah, you too, Andy. Appreciate the time. And you're still a Bristol Bears fan? Bristol fan? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been tough though, because when I left for America, Bristol weren't looking too hot, and then I saw Bristol Bears for the first time in years over Christmas, and I saw a pretty almighty defeat, which was hard after being promised a win. So yeah, still a fan.
Well, whenever you next get over across the waters, you have a friend in Ireland for a rugby match, Munster or Ireland, yeah, or it'd be great to catch a Gallagher Premiership match.
For sure.